A mood of expectation and anxiety hovered in the autumn air of Dornach as the days drew close to Michaelmas 1924. The weather had been glorious, and the lectures and courses given that month by Rudolf Steiner had been astounding. But, on the other hand, anyone close to Rudolf Steiner felt very worried. They observed Rudolf Steiner's extreme exhaustion. They saw the deep furrows of that exhaustion in his face. Now, I posted an essay by Friedrich Hebel on the section website in which Friedrich Hebel, a young man at the time, a youth, described this anxious mood. In that essay, Dr. Hebel talked about the crowning conclusion of the Karma studies, which was a lecture that Rudolf Steiner gave on September 24th, 1924, just 4 days prior to the last address. This is indeed a very important lecture, especially in respect to Rudolf Steiner's personal karma. From a literary perspective, we might read this September 24th lecture as a prelude to the last address. Dr. Hebel wrote, "Could a further step even be taken? Did this lecture on September 24th not signify a final and last expression of leave-taking? We hear this same mood of anxiety when, on the evening of Friday, September 27, for the first time in Rudolf Steiner's life, a brief notice was put up to say that he was unable to give his lecture that night because he was not well enough to do so. The members naturally worried that the lecture on the next day might be canceled also. But the next day, September 28th, Michaelmas Eve, Rudolf Steiner commanded himself to speak. He began by telling his audience that the main topic of his lecture was Michael and the necessity, quote, to prepare the way for a future Michael festival. But Rudolf Steiner quickly adverted to the recent series of Karma lectures. He reminded his audience members to pay attention to these lectures. The audience members were, after all, Platonists and Aristotelians. They needed to know themselves for the sake of the infant society newly born at Christmas and still in its cradle. They had to keep the baby alive. So far, so good. But then Rudolf Steiner modulated to a different key. He told them, quote, "Let us now bring before our souls beings who are intimately connected and will always be intimately connected with the Michael stream." He now brings into the discussion the prophet Elijah, whom his audience has heard about many times, going back to the rebellious, youthful sunrise years of the anthroposophical movement. Those would be the years of theosophy. So far, so good. The audience nods and eagerly takes notes. They are glad to hear their teacher. They are on familiar ground. But then, and now I want you to imagine that you are in the audience that night, and that you have begun to listen to a very familiar and beloved symphony. Suddenly, you hear something musically strange. Something has altered. The composer has rewritten the symphony, reorchestrated it, added new coloration. He has changed it subtly but dramatically. Oh, the music is still familiar, yes, but it has changed. You are surprised. You look at your neighbors. Your neighbors look confused also. Rudolf Steiner has just said, quote, "And we have shown how in the course of time the being who was present in Elijah appeared again at the very most important moment of human evolution, appeared again so that Christ Jesus himself could give him the initiation he was to receive for the evolution of mankind. For the being of Elijah appeared again in Lazarus John, who are in truth one and the same figure, as you will have understood from my book, Christianity as Mystical Fact." You look around again. Has the doctor misspoken? Has he confused the two Johns? True, it is easy to get the two Johns confused, John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. Why, I do it all the time when I am tired, and I call it a senior moment. And Rudolf Steiner is more than tired. He is exhausted, perhaps dying. Time and again over the years, you have heard or read in lecture summaries that the spiritual lineage of the eternal individuality known as Novalis was Adam, Phineas, Elijah, John the Baptist, Raphael, Novalis. But Rudolf Steiner just said, quote, "The being of Elijah appeared again Lazarus John, who are in truth one and the same figure." Again you look around. Friends look puzzled, even worried. They are all knowledgeable. They have read Christianity as a mystical fact. Has he misspoken? Is this a critical sign of his extreme exhaustion? Has the doctor made an error? Well, like you, they know that Rudolf Steiner began his work in theosophy with a very concerted focus on the Gospel of John. And just like you, they know as longtime students that as early as July 1904, Rudolf Steiner had spoken about inaugurating a John Society, that he wanted to establish a section or a department for the exclusive study of the Gospel of John. And, like you, they know that early in the century, before 1902, Rudolf Steiner had presented the mystery of the raising of Lazarus, and that he had explained this mystery in a new, poetic, and startling way. But they also know, like you, that John the Baptist was dead, beheaded, and out of the story when this Lazarus initiation occurred. In their minds, as in yours, as long-term students of Rudolf Steiner, John the Baptist and John the Evangelist were two unique beings. And just like you, as long-time students, they know that Rudolf Steiner has never explicitly associated the individualities of these two unique beings named John, certainly not in Christianity as a mystical fact, which he has indeed just referenced. But Rudolf Steiner, instead of explaining or correcting, he just moves on. He speaks of the painter Raphael, who impelled into color and form the very nature and being of Christianity itself. And he speaks of how this impulse rose again in the poet Novalis. Like Virgil guiding Dante, Rudolf Steiner now takes his listeners on a journey with the Raphael individuality through the harmony of the spheres, the stars, those spiritual worlds which look down upon us and take their share and part in all the deeds of the evolution of mankind. The Raphael individuality journeys to the moon sphere, where he reunites with the spiritual individualities of the great original leaders of mankind, with whose wisdom Raphael, as Elijah, had been deeply inspired. And then to the Mercury sphere, so resonant with meaning for those long-term members in the audience familiar with the early teachings. And then the speaker's resonant but tired voice once more invokes a familiar theme. He sings of Venus, who, quote, lovingly bears the Raphael individuality over to the sun sphere, where the Raphael individuality, as the prophet Elijah, brought to mankind, through the medium of his own people, the truths that belong to the goals of existence. Yes, yes, you say, that's right, that is correct. All this is starting to sound like a familiar symphony again. But then, once more, a change in sonority, a startling key. Referring now to Elijah under the name Raphael, Rudolf Steiner says, quote, we see how in the sun sphere that the Raphael is able to live through over again in a deep and intimate sense, in another way now than when he was on earth as a companion of Christ Jesus. He is able to live over again what he underwent when, through the initiation of Christ Jesus, he, Lazarus, became John. Rudolf Steiner has just once more explicitly associated the Elijah Raphael Novalis Individuality with Lazarus John, John the Evangelist, the disciple whom the Lord loved, John who received directly into his care, directly from Christ Jesus on the cross, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and thus directly into his care from Christ Jesus, the command to serve and to further the heavenly Sophia. Are we hearing this correctly? You look around. But now the symphony sings of Novalis, another familiar leitmotif. Thank you for your attention and for your interest in Romanticism and in the section for the literary arts and humanities. Good night.